Hey, before we jump into the episode here, quick heads up. When I first recorded this, I was in some strange audio-only headspace and I recorded without picture. Not sure what I was thinking, but we'll get some visuals in here. It's just going to be different than the other episodes so far. Here we go. When I figured out that episode 7 of the Story Greenlight podcast was going to be the one that talks about story, I thought, perfect. Episode 007. Let's do a spy movie intro kind of thing. That could be fun. So I recorded some voiceover, started putting it together with some different kinds of classic spy music, and it didn't work. It was working way too hard. It just didn't fit. I looked for some different kinds of music, and that didn't work either. So I'm sitting here thinking, I don't want to redo this voiceover, but it's just not fitting the original idea. And I knew that if it felt weird to me, it would definitely feel weird to you too, and that wouldn't be cool. And then it hit me. Dude, you don't have to throw out the whole idea. Just tweak it a bit. So here's what I came up with. This is Story Greenlight, and your assignment is to harness an incredibly powerful tool that causes your audience to engage with your content over and over again. This tool has the power to change the way your audience thinks, what they believe, and what they buy. It has the power to create a genuine, deeply rooted bond between you and your audience like few other forces in existence. The rewards are great for creators who use this tool well. But as powerful as it is, many creators misunderstand it and fall short when using it. Because the true power of this tool comes from something completely outside the tool itself. So yeah, let's talk about that. Welcome to the Story Greenlight podcast, where we're all about empowering creators like you to tell your stories, connect with your audience, and create the impact that you were put on this planet to make. My name is Jeff Barch. I'm a coach, author, and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience shaping content for ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, Apple, and a whole bunch of others. My team and I support YouTube creators with followings in the hundreds to the many millions. At Story Greenlight, we believe that you matter, your message matters, and the world needs to hear what you have to say. What is up? This is indeed episode 007 of the Story Greenlight podcast. Hope you enjoyed the introduction, it ended up a little bit less 007 and more kind of a sky is falling, end of the world kind of a thing. But hey, all good either way. And what we're talking about today is that ridiculously powerful world-dominating tool from the introduction is the idea of story and how to use it in your content. Been thinking about this for a long time, and the thinking process continues, and this is the latest, greatest version of what has come together for my concept of storytelling and communication, and the results of all the interactions that I've had with you, members of the Story Greenlight community, and within my client work, working with some of the largest media organizations on the face of the planet. It all kind of jumbles up together, and so this is what we got here. My goal for our time together today is to help YouTube creators like you to understand what story is, how it works, and how to use it in your content. And the point of this is for you to be able to create meaningful connection and relationship with your audience. And when that happens, it means that your audience is going to be far more likely to, number one, know, like, and trust you, which is the foundation of any relationship. You have to know, like, and trust someone. And it means that when you use this correctly, your audience will be more likely to consume your content more often and for longer periods of time. Hello, triggering the algorithm and all that thing, giving YouTube what it wants. It wants longer watch time, longer watch sessions, and all that sort of a thing. Your audience will be more likely to tell others about your content because it will just be that good. And of course, when you use this well, your audience will have the connection with you, which will make them more likely to buy products and services that you offer to them. Having said that, Clearly, I'm far from the first person to be talking about story. These ideas are not all original to me. Some of them are. Some of the frameworks and the twists that I put on them are. The source material that I get most of this from is from Joseph Campbell's concept of the hero's journey. And I will say I first saw a shortened version of what I call the master story framework from the book A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, How I Learned to Live a Better Story by Donald Miller. Fantastic book. Highly recommend that. So I've since expanded that master story framework to its current form, and I've done a whole bunch more head scratching and experimenting and interacting with people in the process. Plus, I did go to film school. I had to drop out part way, but that's a whole different story. And I have spent over 2 decades putting these ideas into place with some of the largest media outlets on the face of the planet. Plus, my team and I have also spent the last years here working directly with YouTube creators with followings from thousands to multiple millions. So the goal here is to stay focused on what will actually help you as a YouTube creator. Because frankly, the rabbit hole goes super deep on a lot of this stuff. And what I want to be able to do is to help you understand these ideas without getting unnecessarily overwhelmed. So think of it like this. You get the benefit of film school and decades of work in Hollywood applied through the lens of YouTube without the pretentiousness of every screenwriter under the sun looking down their nose at you, telling why the latest movies all suck and why their screenplay is going to turn the world upside down. So that is one part of Los Angeles that I do not miss. All the posing, all the pretense, all the things. Having said that, the building blocks of story can be deceptively easy to learn, but they can become ridiculously complicated if you don't stay focused on some core ideas. And just like narrator dude from the intro mentioned, the crazy thing about story is that the power doesn't actually come from itself. It does come from something completely outside itself. Now, I'm not going to dangle that in front of you and make you wait to find out what that is, because it's something that we need to sit with and unpack, because a lot of people don't really dig into this much. So here we go. The power of story does not come from the story itself. The real power comes from the emotion that the audience feels and the audience's desire for their own internal change. I'm just going to say that again because it's that big of a deal. The power of story does not come from story itself. The real power comes from the emotion felt by the audience and the audience's desire for their own internal change. The power of story comes from your audience's feelings. So the question becomes, who is story for? And in short, it's for anyone who has feelings or desires. So that's pretty much anyone. And if you don't have feelings, then there's a name for that. That's called psychopath. And psychopaths need to be locked up away from society, because if you don't have feelings, that becomes very dangerous. So for the rest of us, story is a pretty big deal. So let's dig in here in terms of why story is important and how it works. Thing is, we all have a sense of story because story is a mirror of how we all journey through life. The more stories we hear, the more reference points that we have for understanding other people. And the fact is, it's nearly impossible to understand people if all we know is our own story, while their stories are significantly different from our own. With a lot of the things that are happening in the world right now, everyone says, there are people saying, oh, well, you just got to think about what it's like to be other people. You got to show empathy. You got to imagine what it's like to be them. That's really, really hard if you don't know what it's like to be the other person. It's hard to actually communicate that because clearly we cannot actually be other people. But the closest thing we can get is storytelling. We hear the stories of what it's like to be other people. And hearing other stories from other people, it is a critical part of understanding and connecting with other humans in general. and this idea of connection. It's a really big deal. We human beings have a deep fundamental need to connect with other humans. At the most basic level, human connection is required in order to survive at all. That's foundational. At a higher level, if you want to go Maslow on this stuff, human connection and belonging is required for us to have a sense of well-being and meaning. All stories exist in relationship to what I call the master story framework. And this is especially true with Western culture, the Western mindset, as opposed to the Eastern mindset. Everyone that I've talked to, they saying, hey, does this apply to absolutely everyone everywhere? No one's been able to give me a good answer that says no. So here's what we got for the master story framework. The master story framework goes like this. It is about a character who wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. That framework can shrink or expand to whatever length you want. It can go down to a single still image. It can open up a little bit to a 5-second video clip, or it can expand all the way to an epic movie franchise with 20 movies in it, or a multi-season episodic TV series. It can go all the way to those two extremes. Now, expanding that framework longer and to that epic scope, that is hard. The longer the content, the harder it becomes to keep your audience's attention. So in order for that to work, longer form storytelling requires more moving parts, and that means more opportunities for the story to go in different directions that the audience may kind of accept but not really, or they just flat out reject, or the directions that don't fit in with what everyone is used to. A lot of this is telling a story within a framework that people within your culture are used to hearing and they will accept, with just enough of a twist on it so that they're not bored and they think, oh, this is unique, this is interesting. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Getting it to work well at all is tough on this larger scale, and it's straight up impossible to accomplish every single time. And this is why so many people complain about, oh, there are so many lame TV shows, or all the movies are horrible. I mean, even the most celebrated authors, screenwriters, and filmmakers, they put out works that flop at the box office, or they don't gain an audience online or whatever. A lot of people who complain about Hollywood movies being so terrible and they're all just horrible pieces of garbage, usually what people mean when they say that is it's an exaggerated way of saying they are overly familiar with the formula for stories that Hollywood uses. They're overly familiar and they are predictable, and predictable equals boring in the minds of most people. The flip side to that is Hollywood puts out formulaic movies because they work. They have the frameworks that they've been using for the last century, and they still work today. So it's an ongoing balance. But no matter whether you feel that things are formulaic or not, there is still a formula to all this. And on the long format, it's difficult to get it to work well. Here's why. As audiences evolve, they become more sophisticated in what they will or won't accept in a story. And this happens in any medium, not just YouTube. Story is deeply tied to our own experience as human beings. The longer we live, the more stories we see and hear, and we get an overall sense of what feels real and what feels fake. When we're younger, we'll accept anything, any stories you tell us, but the longer we're alive, the more cynical and jaded we can become. So for long format stories to work, all the story elements have to work together in a way that the audience will either accept or willingly suspend their disbelief. Now, long format storytelling often follows or branches out from a more complex storytelling framework known as the hero's journey, made popular by Joseph Campbell. And it speaks of a hero who starts in the ordinary world. They're forced out of the ordinary world on a task or trial. The hero enters the extraordinary world where they encounter conflict and enemies along with guides and mentors who help them along the way. And the hero reaches a crisis point where it seems all is lost, but finally overcomes the obstacles and returns to the ordinary world as a changed person. Now, this storyline, or Joseph Campbell calls it the monomyth, it includes and expands on the master story framework that I've already said. It provides all those extra plot points and all those variables that we need to hold an audience's attention for a longer amount of time. And this longer form storytelling usually takes the act of what is known as 3-act structure, where the story is broken into major sections like acts of a play. Now, storytelling on YouTube can absolutely happen by using only the master story framework, or even smaller parts of it, as we're about to get into in a bit here. But we can also, this is important, we also do well by adding elements of the hero's journey to help us, but not too many, because otherwise you can get overwhelmed by too many extra pieces. Now, if you, as a YouTube creator, were to add only one element of the hero's journey to your story toolkit, it would be that of the guide, the mentor who comes alongside the hero to assist them in overcoming the obstacles in their journey. So most people in the Story Greenlight community are familiar with the Star Wars movies. So in terms of Star Wars, think Yoda as the guide to the hero, who is Luke Skywalker. So many creators mistakenly position themselves as the hero. Hi, look at me. I'm making this video about me that you need to watch. Good luck with that. Now, as creators, the mental shift comes when we realize that we are not the hero. Our audience is the hero, and we are the guide to help them overcome the obstacles of getting what they want. Which then begs the question, what does the audience want? It's usually one of two things. Number one, they're either bored and in the wrong emotional state, so they seek entertainment, or they want inspiration, or they just want an emotional shift. Or number two, they have a question that needs an answer. Shifting of emotional state, or they need an answer to a question. The good news is, the shorter the story format, the more condensed the story framework becomes, the fewer moving parts you need, and the more manageable it is, the more possible it is to have a compelling story that really works. So as short as it is, the master story framework can actually condense into 3 main concepts from the 3 lines. So you have a character who wants something, that gets shortened down into desire. Overcomes obstacles to get it, that gets shortened down to conflict. Experiences transformation as a result, that gets shortened down to change. So instead of a character who wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result, you have desire, conflict, and change. Now, if you had to focus on just one of those 3 concepts, it would be that last one of change. That is the goal of every problem. We want to get something to change from what it was in the beginning. And frankly, if you remember nothing else from our conversation today, it's going to be this. When it comes to telling stories, show change. If you can do that, your storytelling has instant relatability when you present it to the right audience. Now, when it comes to speaking of change, there are 2 main kinds of change in storytelling. Number 1, external, and 2, external. External change is the easier of the 2 to show because it's usually something that you can see. When going back to Star Wars, the Death Star, it's up in the sky, then it gets blown up and it's gone. Now, here's the trade-off with being easier to show. It is harder to make people care about external change because it's usually just about surface level things. Internal change is more tricky to show because it happens inside people's hearts and minds. So back to Star Wars, Luke Skywalker starts as a whiny kid on a farm, and he's thrown into this epic, dangerous journey that results in him becoming a mature Jedi Knight. Now, we don't see how much the change in how he looks as much as the change of how he acts and what he says, which is driven by who he has become and what he believes. And the trade-off here is that even though internal change is harder to show than external change, your audience is going to be way more likely to care about your story because they connect emotionally with internal change, because that's what they want to see happen for themselves. This is the critical thing for YouTube creators to remember. Creator-audience connection is very closely tied to the emotions that come from internal change. Another element of story. Any story will mean more if it has consequences, what we call stakes, attached to it. And you can usually find the stakes in a story by asking, so what, or why does this matter? So in Star Wars, the Death Star is up in the sky above your planet, and if it just sits there and does nothing, then there are no stakes. It's just this thing hanging out in the sky. But if you know that it's a massive weapon that's about to blow up your planet and everything and everyone in it, then all of a sudden the stakes are huge. It's literally life and death. So when the Death Star gets blown up and your planet is saved, we experience both kinds of change. You have the external change because the physical thing is no longer up there in the sky, and you have the internal change because you were terrified that everything and everyone you know will be destroyed, but now you're relieved because that danger is gone. So stakes are also strongly connected to emotion and motivation, the things that we want or want to avoid. The greater the stakes, the more likely your audience is to care about the story and the characters in them. Now, I'm just going to go here right now. The fact of the matter is, when you're creating content on YouTube, you cannot make ridiculously huge stakes for every story that you tell. It will just feel fake. And this is why so much of the really bad reality television that was all over the place in the early 2000s, most of that stuff is gone. And one of the main reasons, speaking as someone who has cut more than my fair share of the stuff, one of the reasons that people just really didn't go for that overly manipulated, hyped up reality television is because they were constantly manipulating the stakes and trying to make everything, it's just this, oh no, what's going to happen next? Go to the commercial break and you come back, tell more stories. Oh no, what's going to happen next? It's this total soap opera cliffhanger kind of a thing, except they were trying to be overly earnest with it, and it just felt fake. And a lot of people just got tired of it. When we're creating on YouTube, we don't have to have huge life and death stakes, but we do need to have a so what. You're going to be a lot farther along if you have a legitimate so what. So that's some of the framework of what story is, how it works, what are the moving pieces that we need to most pay attention to without getting into the weeds of all the plot points and all the dips and twists and turns of long format storytelling. So for now, let's just talk about some ways that we can actually apply this stuff to creating content on YouTube by using story. The most obvious way to use these ideas on YouTube is through story-driven pieces. Now, you can have a vlog showing you or other characters progressing through this master story framework, or you can have a storytime piece where you're telling a story to camera. And when it's done well, audiences identify with the stories and they feel a connection to the content and the creator. Now, when story-driven pieces fall short, it's usually because they're missing an element. They're like one of these. Going back to the master story framework, the character who wants something. A lot of stories that don't work, they don't have a character that has a clear desire for what they want to see happen. If the character is just randomly doing things for no reason, it's going to be harder for the audience to care. So a random wandering vlog of this person doing random things for no apparent reason, well, unless you have a well-established following who loves you and will just automatically watch anything you do, for the rest of the mortal world, that's not a good idea to just have wandering characters who do random things for no reason. One of the other things that stories tend to miss is obstacles or conflict getting in the way of the desired outcome. And the fact of the matter is, if you want to see something happen in your life and you get it and there's no obstacle, there's no resistance, well, it doesn't make for much of a story. Story with no problems, usually not all that engaging. And a lot of creators feel like they're falling short by not having conflict in their stories. That's another big thing that people say, well, dude, I don't know how to put conflict into my stuff. And so some of them, they try to manufacture fake conflict, which, be careful with that. Audiences can smell fake a mile away and they'll either just attack you or leave. But if you can have even a small amount of indecision or unknown quantities that could get in the way of you or the character getting what they want, even that right there, it's a question mark that gets raised in the audience's mind. So find ways that you can say, okay, what could go wrong, or what almost kept this from happening? You might be surprised where you can find those obstacles in your storyline. And another thing that stories tend to miss is the idea of no real stakes. So what if the character gets what they want? If it doesn't make any real difference to them, if the outcome doesn't matter to the characters or your audience, then neither will the story. At this point, many creators will say, okay, that's great. I don't really use story-driven pieces in my stuff. I do mostly tutorial or information-driven stuff or that kind of thing. I don't do vlogs. I'm not a storytime kind of channel. And they might even say, well, should I even use story at all in non-story-driven pieces? And in a nutshell, the answer is yes. Because when you do it well, story connects the audience to the creator with super powerful mental and emotional bonds, and that transcends content style. Having said that, we do need to be careful with how we use story in non-story driven content, because if we do it the wrong way, we are either distracting our audience or we're actively getting in the way of giving them what they want. This is especially important if you're doing straight up, give me the information kind of content, which we'll get into in just a second. So there is a really cool mental shift that a lot of non-story driven creators may not realize is available for them. So check this out. Using story well does not always mean telling a story in your piece. Now, a lot of the times we do that, but the power doesn't just come from telling a story. As we've said before, the real power of story comes from understanding and speaking to the viewer's own story and their own emotion. We have to understand that we are part of the real life story of your viewer. So here is the classic story of the audience for non-story driven content using the master story framework. Following along? Here we go. So the idea of a character who wants something. That's talking about your viewer. They're feeling frustrated because they want an answer to a question. Overcomes obstacles to get it. Your viewer does not know the answer to the question. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on YouTube searching for the answer. Now, they can either look online for the answer, but they know they'll be drowning in articles or blog posts or videos promising the answer, but they don't know where to go. So they go looking for the right source, for the right answer, and ta-da, they find your content. They're overcoming the obstacles of a lack of knowledge and the lack of knowledge of where to find the answer. So that third part of the master story framework experiences transformation as a result. The viewer is at your piece answers your viewer's question, and instead of feeling frustrated at not knowing the answer, they now feel happy or satisfied, and your content is the reason why. And we all live happily ever after. The power of story does not come from the story itself. The real power comes from the emotion that the audience feels and the audience's desire for their own internal change. Now, when we get this, and it lets us apply story to non-story driven content in ways that help everyone get what they want without being obnoxious about it. And sometimes we don't even need to tell a story at all. Sometimes just understanding the story of our audience is all that we need to shape our content. Because get this master story framework It is baked into the process of any demonstration or tutorial video that has ever been made. As we said, your viewer is the character who feels curious or frustrated about a question that they want answered. You, the creator, provide the answer. The character feels good knowing that answer. And the viewer might even feel good about you because you're the source of the answer. All the better. So this story right here, it hinges on your viewer's desire for internal change. They don't just want the answer, they want the feeling of having the answer. It's all about the emotion. It's all about your viewer's emotion. Here's how to speak to that. Number one, you need to speak to the emotions that you or your audience are feeling before knowing the solution. You also need to speak to the obstacles that are the most frustrating. You got to talk about the pain points. Number two, paint a picture of how you or your audience will feel when they get an answer. Number three, you can go through the demonstration, go through the main content of the piece, where you reveal the answer or you reveal the process of how this all works. And then number four, you then speak to the emotions or the results that you have. Now, sometimes going through these steps involves you telling one story through the piece as you demonstrate or teach, or maybe you tell mini stories along the way, something that I call story nuggets. A lot of times, people feel that they need to tell an entire story with all the moving parts of character, desire, conflict, and change, and sometimes you wonder where all those parts are, so you make them up, and the result feels just, it feels forced, it's just not believable. And please believe, if it feels fake to you, it will feel fake to your audience. And the thing is, sometimes story elements don't show up as a full progression of that desire, conflict, and change. Sometimes it shows up as story nuggets, as little pieces of human connection or personality that you drop in throughout a piece. As an example, if you are a realtor giving a virtual tour of a house, and a certain feature reminds you of a happy moment from your childhood, you could drop a story nugget as simple as, hey, there's a great fireplace here in the living room. Some of my best memories growing up were sitting by the fireplace in our living room, reading a book or playing games with my family. Such a great feature. I love this. Not a big deal. It's just that little nugget that you can drop that's an extra thing for people to latch on and connect to. You could, as another example, you could literally be doing a demonstration on how to hang drywall. And you could add a story nugget to a step where you demonstrate a specific step and you tell about a time that you messed up. This part here is extra important because if you do it wrong, you'll end up like me the time I did it the wrong way and I did this and then that happened and it really just sucked and it was a huge pain to fix. Don't want that to happen to you. So here's how you do it the right way, blah, 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 and you go on from there. You can add your own details of what went wrong and how frustrating the result was. And in doing that, you are using the master story framework with the element of the guide. You are the guide who wants to help your hero viewer avoid specific obstacles so your viewer can experience that change of not knowing to knowing how to hang the drywall for themselves and getting that feeling of, yes, I know this now. The next question that I often get from people in the Story Greenlight community is, what if my people just want information? When it comes to that, the number one answer is give them the information. I mean, they are the character who wants something, and if they want information, they will find a way to get it. Now, here's the danger of just giving information. This is why we have to think about this kind of stuff. Newsflash. Any information about anything you or I will ever teach anyone is already available right here somewhere on the internet for free. It used to be back in the early 2000s when information marketing on the internet was just getting started. One of the great headlines that everyone always used was, "Ooh, secrets revealed about blah, 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 blah." Well, you know what? There are no more secrets. Google is here, Wikipedia is here, all the things are here. There are no more secrets about anything. So if you say that I'm here to provide great information, Well, information is now a commodity. And saying, I provide information, that very quickly turns into this transactional thing with zero relationship between the creator and the audience. I mean, how many times has this happened to you where you go to Google to get a question answered? Google serves up the top blog post or the YouTube video, and it's even queued up to the exact section of the video that answers your question. You get your answer, you move on with your life, and you have no clue who that creator was who gave you the answer. Now, you get what you want in your story, but it is a completely impersonal transaction between you and the creator who provided that answer. So the challenge becomes, how do I, the creator, give the audience information while creating a relationship at the same time? And usually that answer involves some combination of speaking to before and after emotions, dropping a quick story nugget while delivering the core information, and afterward, inviting members into another piece of content that uses a longer form story. And along the way, we're also creating relationship by showing our personality, which is something that's always there. Here's some examples of actual story formats that you can use in non-story driven content. So the first example is framing a tutorial with a story bookend. Now, if you're giving a tutorial or a demonstration or a DIY kind of a thing, you can start by saying what you want to do. You're talking about the character and desire, and talk about the reason why you want to do it. That's talking about motivation. And what happens if you don't succeed? That's your stakes. That's your story stakes. Then you go through your body of your content and you talk about things that might get in your way, things that might get in your audience's way. Ta-da, you have your obstacles, you have your conflict. And you finish up the piece by showing a result of a before and after reveal, a transformation, and you wrap up any loose ends of your story. Bonus points on this one. You can ramp up the empathy factor. You can ramp up that emotional connection by talking about any internal change that makes sense to what you're talking about. So how are you or your audience feeling before the body of your piece? And how are you or your audience feeling afterward? Now, an example of this is there's a channel called Fix This, Build That. And Brad, the main character on the channel, he does this really, really well. He does straight up tutorials, usually about home improvement and woodworking, but story structure is hardwired into almost everything that he does. Make sure you check out his channel. I will include a link to that in the show notes. Another story format is what I call intercutting segments. And this works really well when you have a full-length story and a full-length tutorial, and you find a way to layer them together. And you literally, what you do is you just break the story and the tutorial into chunks, and you flip-flop back and forth between them. You begin the piece. You could start with a brief setup with what you're going to do and the story that you're going to tell. And then you literally just show one section of the tutorial. Then you tell a section of the story. Then you show the next section of the tutorial until both the story and the tutorial are done. And when you do it well, you set it up such that there's a commonality, some sort of commonality or thing tying it all together. And when the tutorial finishes and the story finishes, those commonalities converge. One of our members of our community called the Green Room at Story Greenlight is a guy by the name of Dan Thompson, and he has a channel called Guns and Guitars. And one of the things that he does is he builds electric guitars, either from scratch or from kits and stuff like that. And what he did for one of his stories was he showed how he was building this guitar from scratch, but the commonality was he was building it because he wanted to give it to someone who was really deserving of this guitar and he knew would absolutely love having it and was already an excellent guitar player, but just really wanted something like this guitar that Dan was building. And so he told this story, intercutting, going back and forth. He told the story of this guy, showed a chunk of creating the guitar, showed another chunk of the guy's story, another chunk of building of the guitar, and then Dan showed the moment where he was able to give that to the man whose story he just told. And you should have seen the look on the guy's face. It was so, so cool. I will make sure to leave a note for that video in the show notes. Another great example is Deborah Beard, one of the longtime members of the Story Greenlight community. She has a channel called Debbie's Design Diary, and she has a playlist there. If you look her up, she has a playlist called My Favorite Uploads, and a bunch of these videos, they look like just regular tutorial things. Her channel talks about how to do DIY furniture refinishing and arts and crafts work. And on that upload, on that My Favorite Uploads playlist, you'll see a whole bunch of videos talking about how to do custom painted furniture and craft products. And she intercuts that with full-length stories from her life. And you should see the comments in some of the videos. Her audiences, they like the tutorials, but man, they love the stories. I'll definitely be dropping a link to that playlist in the show notes, so check that out too. And both of these examples, I mean, Debbie's audience skews almost exclusively female. Dan Thompson's audience is almost exclusively male. So please believe this is not just about one kind of content. This can work across all kinds of different audiences. And the other storytelling format for non-story driven pieces, we've already talked about it, the idea of story nuggets. If neither of these other formats seem to be a good fit for your specific piece, there's almost always an opportunity to add in short story nuggets here and there. I mean, if you're paying attention, I've been doing it all through this episode right here. And they may not contribute a full-blown story to your piece, but they're great for creating human connection and points of reference. And that's what story is all about anyway. And when you're thinking of what kind of things you can drop for story nuggets, you can talk about personal facts, memories, things that you've experienced, mistakes that you've made, associations, and this reminds me of that, and all sorts of things like that. It's been interesting to think about how I've progressed personally when it comes to talking about story, because for over 20 years, I was living in Los Angeles, in the storytelling capital of the entire world, and as much as I was wanting to not be the typical ivory tower Hollywood snob that so many people talk about, I kind of was that guy for a while. I mean, I thought that when I was saying, hey, let's talk about story, and because story is king, that's what everyone comes to Hollywood for, and everyone wants to be like Hollywood, right? Well, no, fact is, while there are some people who really want to get Hollywood in their life and they want to be there and do their thing, most people don't want to be Hollywood. They just want to be a more upgraded version of themselves. And so what I realized that story, especially when it comes to content creation, story is one part of a bigger picture. Now, can telling great stories get you more views on YouTube? Absolutely. Can telling great stories mean that people will watch more of your content more often and you'll get more views and subscribers? Absolutely. Will telling a great story guarantee that you get those things? No, it will not. The reason why is story is just one of the tools in your creative toolbox, and all those tools have to be in place and everything has to work together. Story, for instance, does not relieve us from the need for a great title and a great thumbnail. If you're creating for a visual medium like YouTube, story is not a replacement for having content that solves a problem for your audience. Story is not a replacement for saying having subject matter that people are searching for in the first place. But when you get all those things working together, what story does is it adds fuel to the fire that you've already built. It adds that entertainment and human connection to material that might otherwise be kind of just regular old information. And it helps fuel that connection, maybe to you, maybe to other people, and it gives a reason to watch your content for more than just the information itself, which is kind of a big deal. Everyone in the world is giving out information. How do you set yourself apart? Build a connection. tell a great story. And when you do it right, story is an incredibly powerful way to help people understand other people in ways that they could never experience themselves. And it's a way that we can literally bring people together who would otherwise be divided. That is one of my personal missions, is to use storytelling to connect people instead of dividing them. And story, it's one of the most powerful ways to spread ideas that bring people together and that they can literally change the world. We wouldn't want to be a part of that. This is still only scratching the surface of how story works in general and how it can work for you. If you find these kind of ideas helpful, we talk about them all the time at Story Greenlight, and especially in our private membership called the Green Room. And it's all about where we help creators apply these ideas specifically to your stuff. I mean, let's face it, growing as a creator can take years or even decades if you make all the mistakes on your own. And please don't do that. Life is too short. There are too many messages that need to be spread to the world and too many people that need to be reached for us to just sit here slogging through all the mistakes. So if you'd like to shorten those learning curves and move farther down your own path faster than you ever thought possible, then you should consider joining us in the Green Room. You can try out the Green Room for a month for free at the link in the description below. I'll see you there.